as always. So
yeah.
okay.
Do you want me to introduce you, or do you want to just go ahead?
Yeah, please do, Sue. I'd like that.
Oh, great.
I'm teasing you, Sue. Don't worry about it. I will introduce myself. But
I adore Allison. She's fantastic. Here you go.
Give me a moment and I'll start to share screen.
And if everyone could mute, we'll do chat box for questions.
Okay. I can get slideshow. All right. Can you see? Okay. All right, guys. So my name is Allison Jones. I'm an educational program coordinator at the Garden, and I'm going on my 14th year here at the Garden doing educational programs. So thanks for signing up. And let's go ahead and get started because I have a lot of slides to cover. So I want to start with the question, why butterfly gardens? Why are they important and why do we want them? And the obvious reason that probably lots of you are here is because you find butterflies beautiful and fascinating to watch. That's how I feel about them. And also many of you might already be gardeners and enjoy the beautification that plants bring to your landscape. This gardening for a creature thing also helps to further that connection to nature beyond just gardening and being around plants, which furthers that connection to nature. And that's, as you know, if you garden, it can be rather therapeutic and gratifying and really bring benefits to your life in that way. And of course, on a practical side, these are valuable pollinators. And when you garden for butterflies, you're going to end up bringing in other pollinators into the landscape as well. Of course, butterflies benefit. You're creating habitat for butterflies in a time when they're losing a lot of their habitat. So you're essentially helping to conserve populations. And again, the same is true for those other insects, those other arthropods that you're bringing in to the garden. And really, in the end, gardening for wildlife, which is what you're doing, butterfly gardening is one aspect of wildlife gardening. What you're doing benefits all, because as you increase the diversity of plants in your garden, you're going to see an increase in the diversity of arthropods, meaning insects, spiders, mites, so forth. And since those are the driving, beyond plants, those are kind of the driving force behind the rest of the food web, you're going to see an increase in biodiversity in general. And biodiversity means a healthy ecosystem. So you are contributing when you garden for wildlife. And so really what you're doing, it does go beyond butterflies. All wildlife gardens are providing habitat, and the elements of habitat, of course, are food, water, shelter, and places to raise young. So we're going to, by providing a garden for butterflies, we're going to focus in on butterflies with our plant selections, but you're still following those principles. And it all starts with plants, right? That's why we're gardening. In general, keep in mind that native plants tend to meet the needs of wildlife best, and we need to increase the natives in our landscapes if we want to help wildlife populations. But we can still use non-natives, and we can use them well as long as they're not invasive and dominating the landscape. The real key is diversity of plants, so more plants and more different types of plants and more natives. So a good place to start is with this question of, if we know that insects are kind of that driving force beyond, or that push the rest of the food web along past plants and transfer plant energy to the rest of the food web, it's a good place to focus on pollinators within the insect arthropod group. And of course, not all pollinators are insects, but it's a great place to start. As I say, does my yard provide habitat for pollinators? And of course, butterflies are an example of that. Now, if your yard looks like this, it's okay. Many people's yards do look like this. This is the way a lot of developments kind of just happen. And so if your yard does look like this, you're not providing much to wildlife. You have lots of turf and not much else. There's a lack of biodiversity. But the good news is you have improvement that you can add, and you have nowhere to go but up. So even with small areas of garden, even little borders like this, you can really have an impact, because people tend to think, well, I don't have a big yard, there's not much I can do, this isn't really going to help a lot of wildlife. But if we think of all of our spaces kind of collectively as little stepping stones, that ultimately when we add them together, they create wildlife corridors, then we really realize that our actions, our gardens have an impact. So all of the land that has become so fragmented by development, we're helping wildlife by these little stepping stones. And you can kind of think of it like you're trying to cross a creek, right? If there are no stones, you can't get across. If there are really big stones, then maybe 4 or 5 people can cross at the same time. It has a larger carrying capacity. So if you have a big garden, well, great, it's that much better. But even in the creek, if there are just little rocks that you can get a toe hold on, that's still better than no rocks. That's still providing some movement. And so that's how you need to think of it. If you have a really small space, like my last house, I had less than a 1/4 acre, but you can still use that small space in an impactful way. Now, so to begin, you're going to need to choose a site, a butterfly gardening site, and you need to have these things in mind. For butterflies are cold-blooded animals, and they they rely on the ambient temperature, the ambient warmth, to warm their bodies enough for flight and foraging. So they like sunshine, and many of the plants, especially nectar plants that they prefer, like sunshine as well. So typically people are advised to pick a site that is full sun, so 6+ hours a day. It's best if you can get morning to mid-afternoon sun, because they're going to be basking a lot in the morning. But this does not mean that you can't have butterfly-friendly plants in shaded areas of your yard. The picture is the big perennial bed in my backyard that I see as kind of my wildlife garden, butterfly garden. It's there because it's the only place on my acre of land that has full sun. So I have definitely incorporated other plants in the more shaded areas that still cater to butterflies and pollinators. Butterflies need refuge from wind and rain and predators. So that's where some of your structural plants come in, your trees, shrubs, and larger perennials. But also as far as windbreaks go, this is where if you just want to incorporate these plants into a bed on the side of your house, a fence garden, those things can serve as windbreaks as well. Butterflies, and this is the case for all your insects, right, are harmed by chemicals, and butterflies are harmed at every life stage by chemicals. So as much as you possibly can, avoid insecticides, fungicides, and herbicides, because of course they're relying on plants. And if you kill off the wrong or unintended, I guess I should say, plants, you can potentially hurt them that way too. So this goes for all gardening. Choose the right plants for the right site. That of course is always the case, but I am emphasizing it here because if you try to force a plant to grow somewhere it doesn't want to, oftentimes it ends up with pest problems. And you may be able to get it to grow, but you may end up with more pest problems you have to deal with, and you don't want to have to deal with those problems because you're trying to avoid using chemicals or having to deal with those problems in general. Okay, so oftentimes folks are looking at one location for a butterfly garden, and that is perfectly fine. You can designate an area of your yard as, this is my butterfly garden, that over there is my cactus garden, or whatever. You can certainly do that. But I encourage you to consider more than one location and kind of think about these practices throughout different areas of your space, your property. Okay, so you kind of have to think next, well, what space works for you? Now you know you got to meet the needs of the butterfly, and of course you're going to want to meet your needs as well. So you may only have a small space, and it's good to start small. It's more manageable. So kind of like this fence garden here, you may just start with one border, and then as time goes on, you may add to it. But you also may have a yard that has lots of already existing garden space that's been cultivated, and you certainly can edit and add to those spaces to cultivate butterflies and butterfly activity there. and to make that space even better. The picture on the right is actually a picture from my parents' house. They have a water feature there. I know for a fact my parents did not, years ago when they installed this, they did not say, they knew it would draw wildlife, but they did it mainly because they wanted it, right? They liked the look of it. My mom said, I want to hear water when I'm outside. But water really draws in a lot of wildlife, and certainly they have a good diversity of plants in their yard. This is just a little picture, a little slice of their yard. And it really does, it's ended up ticking a lot of the boxes of wildlife needs. And there's tons of butterfly activity in their yard and tons of other animals that visit their yard as well because of this garden space. All right, so before we start looking at plants, let's look at the butterfly life cycle quickly, which you probably all are familiar with, right? But the reason it's important to kind of review it is because really this is where plant selection becomes very important. So this is a monarch butterfly's life cycle, but butterflies all have a kind of a similar life cycle. They start as eggs, okay? And then they hatch into a caterpillar stage, their larval stage. And first of all, the adult butterfly will not lay her eggs on just any plant. She's going to select only certain plants, they're species specific, and she's going to select those plants that will work as larval food for her caterpillars so that once the eggs hatch, they have something to eat. And when they hatch, they're voracious and they're going to eat a lot per their body size. So this is where host plants come in. That's what these plants that I'm referring to are called, host plants. So in order to have a true habitat for butterfly, remember that one of those components was a place to raise young. So if you truly want that, you do have to have host plants present. Then of course, for the adult butterfly, you need nectar plants. And a lot of folks just tend to focus on nectar plants. And I understand that because they are showy and pretty, but you're not really providing that habitat if you don't also have those host plants present. All right, so let's get started with nectar plants. I want to go ahead and say that I'm going to go, the next slide are all plants, plant suggestions, okay? And I'm going to try to go through them quickly because I don't want to go over, but also I want to remind you that this is just the tip of the iceberg. These plant suggestions are based on plants that I've grown in my own gardens, seen do well and attract butterflies in other people's gardens and at the botanical garden and then in our butterfly garden. But there are just so many out there. And this is just to kind of provide a little bit of guidance about groups of plants that work and inspiration, plants that you might like the look of. But when you're looking to provide nectar plants, one of the main things that you want to focus on is that they are nectar rich, right? They're a source of nectar, of adult food for the butterflies. And you can use both native and non-native. But again, if you can incorporate natives, that's really great. It's really helpful for wildlife. You want to plant these in large swaths of color. That's going to help attract butterflies more easily, and it helps them to nectar more easily once they're there. They don't have to travel quite as far from flower to flower. And you're really looking for continuous bloom throughout the growing season, so spring through fall. Some plants have a really long bloom time, but ultimately what makes the most sense is to plant a diversity of plants so that something is blooming at any one of those given times. One thing to keep in mind, if you're looking at a plant, you don't know 100% sure if it's a butterfly friendly plant, there are some things that can kind of tip you off that it may be a good option. You're looking for plants that are in clusters of flowers oftentimes. Butterflies really like inflorescences like this penta up here and this buddleia is an example. Because again, they're not having to travel to get lots of nectar. They are able to stay in one spot and get flower after flower after flower after flower full of nectar. They also tend to like tubular flowers. Again, those tend to have a lot of nectar in them. But they also like composite flowers like this zinnia down at the bottom because they kind of have this landing pad structure. And that's important for butterflies generally, is they like a plant they can land on and nectar at. oftentimes butterfly advice will say butterflies like this color and that color. They'll say, you know, pink, white, yellow, purple, red, orange. But I don't really worry about color too much, because if you get a diversity of plants, you're just going to kind of end up with a diversity of colors. Also, we can't see what a butterfly sees. So to some degree, some of that is, it's just kind of hard to make a call on the pattern or colors of a flower, because oftentimes, as you can see in the upper right corner, there are nectar guides present that we don't see, and sometimes that we do see, that attract butterflies. So moving on to suggestions, we're going to start with a nectar perennials. Now, I have these kind of organized by spring bloom through summer into fall. And over on the left, you'll see 3 different types of phlox. I put 3 different types because there are just tons of types of phlox. I just happened to pick ones that were all kind of a pale pink color, but there are a variety of colors and forms. We have this panicle form, the typical garden phlox, creeping phlox, which you're seeing everywhere right now, blooming. And the little Carolina phlox is a native phlox. I have this in my yard. But the point is, phloxes are a great choice. Butterflies love them, and they provide that early spring nectar when a lot of other things aren't blooming. So beyond that, you can see there's Eastern Red Columbine. This is one of my favorite native wildflowers. And again, this is one that I have tucked in my more shaded areas. It is also attractive to hummingbirds. We also have in the upper right, Scabiosa. You've seen this before in your garden centers. It's not a native, pincushion flower, people call it, but it is a good addition to the garden. It's really pretty and it's very attractive to butterflies, and again, an early bloomer. Down at the bottom, there's threadleaf blue star. And I don't see this that often on butterfly plant lists, but I have it in my yard and I really like it a lot because number one, it is an early nectar source for butterflies, and also hummingbird moths really like this plant. And I really like hummingbird moths, so I like attracting those. But it also ticks a lot of boxes for my needs as a gardener, right? Design wise, it has, in spring, it has these really pretty blue star-like flowers, really feathery, pretty foliage that's kind of unusual. And in fall, it turns that great, golden and kind of russet shades. And of course, azaleas. So the picture I have is of a native azalea. And we have a variety of native azaleas available at our plant sale. Many of the plants that are in this are available at our plant sale. And actually, I'll try to send you guys a list of butterfly friendly plants available at our plant sale after the presentation. But azaleas in general are a great butterfly attractant in the springtime in particular, but there are different bloom times for azaleas, of course. All right, moving along. So Baptisia, false indigo, is also a nice one that's really tough. It's an early bloomer, and it is definitely attractive to butterflies and other pollinators as well. Below it is coral honeysuckle. I love this one. It's a southeastern native, and it's such a show of color for a spring bloomer. You don't find a lot of bright reds. And as you can imagine, not only does it attract butterflies, but it also attracts hummingbirds. So it's a great choice, and it's a vine. If you have a place for a vine, this one's a great one. All the examples to the right side of the screen are all different salvias. Again, kind of like the phlox, there are just tons of different kinds of salvias. There are annual and perennial salvias, but there are different colors, different heights. They're pretty much all attractive to butterflies and pollinators, and they're tough and they bloom a long time. So there's just a lot to like about salvias, and I definitely would recommend incorporating some of them. Now, on this slide, these I kind of grouped these flowering perennials together because they have that composite structure that I mentioned earlier, and they also, beyond being attractive to butterflies, these are all attractive to birds as well. And again, going back to the whole wildlife gardening concept, you're focusing in on attracting butterflies, but My hope is that you will attract more than just butterflies, and more than likely you will attract more than just butterflies. But that's how I've grouped these together. The echinacea there, the purple cone flower, the blanket flower, and the black-eyed Susan are natives. And again, with natives, there's kind of degrees of native, right? There's North American natives, Southeastern natives. And if you get really purist about it, you know, you can, if you'd like to find out your natives for just your zip code, you can use a website called Native Plant Finder that National Wildlife Federation and Doug Tallamy have put this together. It's really helpful, but it's also it is very limiting. You know, you're not going to see a lot of these kind of garden variety things on those lists. So the goal is to integrate both so that it keeps you excited about gardening, but you're providing wildlife what they need. All right, so here you can see on the left, this is a very red, the scarlet bee balm, but Monarda in general is great for butterflies and great for hummingbirds. It tends to be really good for butterflies and hummingbirds because it requires either that long beak or proboscis to get in there. So a lot of other pollinators can't quite use it just as well, but it's a great plant and it's a native. Stokes aster there in the middle is one of my favorite. It's a native, but it is a really showy one, and it's just really attractive. I believe we sell this at the plant sale again. The Monardas, the Stokes aster, Blazing Star. I think all of this is available at the plant sale. But on the right, you can see Blazing Star and Liatris in general. Same thing. As many of these, it's not just this one variety that I'm showing you but Liatris is attractive to butterflies. And in my case, I have a little picture down there of another plant. And the reason I'm showing you that is because I plan to buy some of this Liatris spicata this year, because I want to use it to essentially replace my Verbena bonariensis that's in my garden. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Verbena bonariensis. It's that little plant in the bottom corner. I inherited what I have here. It reseeds really, really readily. And in fact, it's basically been determined to be invasive in many, many areas. I don't know if it's officially on an invasive list for South Carolina yet, but in parts of the Southeast, it has been tagged. And it's a shame because it is really, really attractive to butterflies. And I have removed most of it from my yard, but I haven't removed all of it and I need to. So my goal is to remove it and kind of replace it with this Liatris. And that's just something to think about that you can do. When I mentioned editing and adding to your garden spaces, your existing garden spaces, if you have something that you know is invasive, I encourage you to get rid of it. And it's even better if you can replace it with something native, but mainly just get rid of it. All right, so this next page, we're getting into stuff that works really well into fall. And providing nectar in fall is especially important for the migratory species of butterflies. They're going to be needing to fatten up, if you will, for their migrations. And so on the far left, we have Boltonia. That is a really, it's not a true aster. It's called false aster. But it's a really pretty kind of meadow looking flower. We have it in our butterfly garden at the gardens. It's very pretty and it does get a lot of attention. Next to it in the purple is a New England aster, but asters in general are good choices for butterflies. Butterflies like asters. This one's just a kind of an easy to find variety New England aster, and it's very pretty and popular. And over to the right is autumn joy sedum, but sedums in general are a nice thing to add in because they're really tough and easy. They, again, are something that's blooming into the fall when these butterflies are looking for nectar, when other things are not flowering as much anymore. Yarrow is on the very bottom. I particularly like this really clear yellow of this coronation gold, but there are lots of different colors and heights of yarrow that you can choose from as well. All right, so this page again is really good choices for having fall nectar sources. And everything on this page is a native. I have solidago and so the goldenrod and the blue mist flower in my yard, and I really love those colors together. So that's meeting a need of mine. But I certainly see lots of butterfly activity on these two plants, and I'm hoping to add in some of the helianthus. This helianthus that's in the top right corner, that picture was taken in the botanical garden, kind of in our pollinator garden area. And that's just one monarch on it. But that helianthus, or those helianthus, multiple plants, are covered in monarchs in the fall. And it is so fun to watch when they head over there, because they're just chowing down, and there are lots of them. So definitely a good one. And Joe Pyeweed is a great one. Again, all of these are kind of taller, a little bit more wild looking plants. So it's something to plan for in your design and be aware of. The blue mist flower is not particularly tall. It's maybe 3 feet tall, but the others can get, 6 feet or high. So keep that in mind. All right, so moving on to nectar trees and shrubs. A lot of folks forget about trees and shrubs when they're thinking about nectar plants, but it's good to make note that you may already have some trees and shrubs in your landscape that do meet some nectar needs. And a lot of times trees are spring bloomers. So again, they might meet the needs of migratory butterflies or just early emerging butterflies, and they're all looking for nectar when there's not a ton in bloom. So on the left, I have a fothergilla, and I included this intentionally because I don't see it on a ton of lists, although if you dig deep, you will find that it is considered of value to butterflies. But why I included it is because in my yard, it's one of the first plants that I see activity on. I go outside, and that's a picture of mine, and it's been in bloom for a week or 3 now, a couple weeks now. And you will see activity on it already. So you'll see things nectaring. Again, it meets design needs. In fall, it turns that beautiful kind of yellow orangey color. You can see my daughter's standing in front of it, but it's a good plant. That is Mount Airy. So it's a cultivar of our native Fothergilla major. In the middle there is a picture of a spirea. Spireas are also super early bloomers, which is great for providing nectar to butterflies. The picture there of the eastern tiger swallowtail on that spirea, that particular spirea is Ogon spirea, and that was in my parents' yard about 2 weeks ago. So it was already getting activity as it was blooming out. And I particularly like that variety because it's got such a pretty chartreuse color, and it turns a nice fall color that you can see to the left there. But I will tell you, again, it's not a native, and you do have to be careful because Japanese spireas are invasive. So you don't want to select one of those. To the right is an example of a viburnum. Viburnums in general tend to attract butterflies. And this one is one in my yard that I inherited with the property, but I like it a lot because it's just a really showy specimen. And I do see butterflies nectar at it. And it's great as a cut flower. So there's a lot of things that it's providing to me as a gardener, but it does provide for the butterflies. And viburnums too are a host for hummingbird moths, again, if you're interested in those. Down at the bottom is a native Virginia sweetspire. And again, it's just a great nectar plant. It's a native and it has that beautiful fall color. Here are some trees that make really good butterfly, part of your butterfly support system. And they're all southeastern natives. On the left is that beautiful red bloom of the buckeye. That's one of my favorite trees. They're very good in a wildlife garden. And of course they attract hummingbirds as well. In the middle is a dogwood. Now, dogwoods in general are just a great wildlife tree. They provide early nectar, right? My dogwoods bloomed. I'm looking at some out the window. My dogwoods started blooming in the last week, maybe a little bit into last week. But so they provide that early nectar, and they provide, of course, berries that the birds like later on. And they also are a host for spring azure butterflies. So the little blue guys that we see flitting around. Eastern redbud down at the bottom there is a great choice. Those are in full show right now. They have been. And of course they flower before they leaf out into those pretty heart-shaped leaves. But they're a great source of nectar. And I believe Eastern redbud is also a host to some of our elfin butterfly species, or small elfin butterflies. Up at the top is sweet bay magnolia. This is one that has a really beautiful smell, and it's more of an early summer bloomer. It's not so much, the rest of these bloom earlier than this guy, but it's a good addition. Magnolias are good additions, but sweet bay magnolia is a native, and it's a really nice option. All right, so moving on to annuals. Annuals, I feel like really boost your kind of nectar production during the summer, but also I just like to garden. So some people are like, I don't want to deal with annuals, and that's fine. But I do. I enjoy, seeding my own annuals and having annuals in containers and so forth mixed in with perennials. But they're really a good source of nectar. And what I'm suggesting are just some of my standby tried and true. They're not exotic. They're kind of traditional flowers. And honestly, they're just successful. On the left is Mexican sunflower, Tithonia. This plant butterflies love. You can imagine that monarchs might like it, right? Since it's called Mexican sunflower. But all butterflies seem to really like it. But again, in true butterfly plant form, it tends to get kind of big and a little wild looking. So keep that in mind. But you may not know that marigolds, they're also a good source of nectar for butterflies. And I really like using marigolds because I use them anyways as a companion plant in my vegetable garden. A lot of folks use them for, bedding annuals or container annuals. And it's just good to know that they can run a lot of duties for you in your garden, okay? At the far right are zinnias. And zinnias are basically, I think, my favorite annual for butterflies because they're so easy. They're fun. I mean, I have young children and I work with children at work. And so they are really gratifying because you can watch them grow at a rapid rate and they're pretty reliable and you always get lots of pretty color. There's different ones to choose from. And so they're just a great choice. The one thing I will say, the picture at the top right, that's from one of our children's garden areas years ago. And probably children helped plant them. I don't remember, but probably that's the case. You don't want to plant them too close together because they do get powdery mildew. So just watch out for that. All right. Moving on to these annuals. Again, these are kind of standbys. On the left, we have Cosmos. Cosmos are easy to grow from seed. The two that I've shown are kind of the standard mix packs that you can get. Bright Lights, which is yellows and oranges, and a Sensation Mix, which is more the pinks and whites. But they're reliable. They like butterflies. They like a little bit of wind protection because they're fine stemmed and everything. So keep that in mind. Gomphrena, the one I've shown is Strawberry Fields. It's just one of my favorites, but Gomphrena or Globe Amaranth, they are really popular with butterflies, particularly the little sulfur butterflies. I see a lot of those visiting the Globe Amaranth. And Globe Amaranth are good as cut flowers too. I really like having flowers to cut. These ones cut, they dry well. So that's an extra added bonus. The other three on this page, I've chosen just to give you some really easy options that you can integrate easily into containers, but also as bedding annuals. And one that I always use because again, I have shade. So on my back patio, I want to draw the butterflies up from my perennial garden area where I have all the rest of the butterfly plants, but I want to draw them to the patio so I can enjoy them, right? So I tend to plant impatiens in my containers. and they are a good nectar source for butterflies. And of course, like I said, they have sun patiens and shade varieties, but I use the shade ones because I'm in shade. If you're, those are easy to find at box stores. So it's one of the reasons I'm, or just anywhere for that matter. Same is true for vinca in the upper right corner. So if instead you have a hot, sunny, dry location, these things are tough as nails and they will bloom really well, and they provide a good source of butterfly nectar. So if you have containers that you're looking for an annual, these are a good choice. And of course, pentas. Pentas are known as kind of a butterfly magnet, and there's all different types of pentas that you can choose from. Again, they work well in containers, but they also work well as a bedding annual too. All right, now I included this cleome here. I know that lots of people see this plant as kind of an out of fashion annual, but my husband and I both, we have kind of a soft place in our heart for it. Both of us remember seeing cleome every year at our grandparents' homes. And so I tend to incorporate it kind of in my cut flower area next to my vegetable garden. And I wanted to mention it because you don't see it on a list that much, but these guys do attract butterflies, and you can see in that picture, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but they do attract hummingbirds as well. There's a little hummingbird up here that was nectaring. And I just think that it goes to show that, like I said, these are just suggestions. There's a whole world of plants out there, and diversity is the key. Now this one's not a native, and it reseeds the old varieties, which is what I have. They reseed super readily. I don't think they're on any invasive lists, but they're certainly aggressive. The new varieties are sterile, and that's what you want as a sterile variety. But anyhow, you want to pick what works for you in your garden. All right, so we're moving on to larval food plants, host plants. Like we talked about at the beginning, these are necessary to complete that entire life cycle to provide true habitat for butterflies. They attract butterflies to your garden to lay their eggs, and then they provide the food for the growing caterpillars. And if you don't have these in your area, whether they were already present or you're providing them or a combination of both, if you don't have them, you're not going to have near the presence of butterflies as if you just have nectar plants. Because if you just have nectar plants, you're essentially providing a little butterfly restaurant, and they're going to come and feed, and they're not going to stay as long. Hosts, of course, are species specific. So you have to do this successfully, you have to kind of get to know who your local butterflies are and what their needs are in order to fill those needs. Keep in mind that you may already have host plants nearby. In fact, you probably do have some of these host plants nearby. And if you live in a more rural or a more naturalized setting, you're going to have a lot of these present more easily. If you don't, then you're going to have to try a little harder to incorporate hosts into your garden to have success. One thing to keep in mind is if you're using kind of smaller herbaceous hosts, especially, plant enough of them so that they won't just mow down your one plant and be done. You need to plant enough to sustain who you're hosting, and especially if you want some for you too, depending on what it is you're growing, you need to try to plant enough to share between yourself and the caterpillars. All right, so I have chosen 10 because there are, I think, 165 species of butterflies in South Carolina. I have chosen 10 to focus on and to give you examples of their host plants as we meet them, so to speak. I've chosen these 10 because they are some of our most common butterflies, and because they're some of our larger or showier butterflies. And most folks, that's what they're interested in, at least at first, is getting the more visually present butterflies. So this first one is the Eastern Tiger Swallowtail. This is our state butterfly. I love these guys. These are probably some of the most common butterflies you'll see. And for some folks, common becomes boring, I guess, for them. For me, it doesn't. I love these. They're some of my favorite butterflies to see. And for them, Two of their favorite host plants are wild black cherry, Prunus serratna, and tulip poplar. Now, one of the reasons they're so common, though, is they will use a variety of host plants, and most of those are trees. So we already said wild black cherry and tulip poplar, but they will use birch, ash, cottonwood, willows. So that's why we see more of them. It kind of makes sense. Moving on to black swallowtail. So both eastern tiger swallowtail and black swallowtails are where I would encourage people to start. I'd say have that be your goal. You're trying to attract these guys because they're easier. They're a feasible goal for you, right? That will be encouraging because you're going to see them. You're going to have success. And for black swallowtails, they like things in the Apiaceae in the carrot family. So parsley, dill, and fennel are all things that you can grow to host black swallowtail. And that's pretty cool too, because these are things you can use too, if you have any left, because they really are voracious eaters, these caterpillars. So do plant enough to accommodate everyone's needs. The next one is pipevine swallowtail. Pipevine swallowtails are one of those butterflies that have limited host plants. So typically what you find on a list for pipevine hosts is just pipevine. There is another Aristolochia species that they use. I don't quite remember its name now, but basically if you want to attract them, if you want to host them, you're going to need pipevine. The picture of pipevine in the slide is from the Botanical Gardens Butterfly Garden, and we have it over this arbor. And you can see in the bottom right, one of our students in a class is looking at a caterpillar there. You can tell that's early in the season because although you can see some munch marks on those leaves, there aren't near as many as there will be later. This really gets used. It's really fun to go over there and just count how many caterpillars are all over it. They really, really use it. You can see it doing its work right there before your eyes. Spicebush swallowtail, it's in its name, right? So these guys use spicebush as a host and they use sassafras. I like both of those plants. So they're great. They're good plants to have in your landscape. I particularly love sassafras. I think they're a beautiful tree. You can see the fall color of the sassafras there with the caterpillar on it. These are, like I said, they just so happen to be plants. You know, each of these is different. You have your own preferences, but for me, that's great. They like it and I like it too. So good choices for landscape. This is a red spotted purple. It looks kind of similar to some of these other dark swallowtails that we saw, but there are no tails, right? This is not a swallowtail. Red spotted purples will use a variety. They'll use, the picture here is wild cherry, and I chose that because Eastern tiger swallowtail uses it as well. So that's kind of, you're getting multiple species met with this tree. But they'll use poplar as well. They'll use cottonwoods, oaks, hawthorns. So they use a lot of tree species. Again, if you live near a wooded area, you may have a lot of these host plant needs met for certain butterfly species. So keep that in mind. What that means is, right, you need to survey your landscape. You need to see what is present that's already meeting that needs. I don't need to duplicate that. I need to introduce the need that's not being, or introduce the solution to a need that's not being met. All right, so next is common buckeye. I do see buckeyes in my yard. I don't see them as much as some of the other butterflies. And for that reason, I will be buying some of this wild petunia from the plant sale. It is a host of theirs, a native. And below it, you see plantain. So that's I believe a narrow leaf plantain, but there's different just plantains that grow, and folks tend to think of these as weeds, right? So this kind of goes back to the whole, try not to use herbicides and so forth, because these guys are providing a host for this butterfly. They'll also use snapdragons, toadflax, But again, just this may be something that you say, I'm getting these guys. I sense that I have a good little plantain or toadflax population near me. But you have to find out, do you need, if you want more of those there, you're going to have to increase the host and nectar sources. So Gulf fritillary, this is another kind of like the pipevine swallowtail that has limited hosts it will use. This one only uses passifloras, passion vines. And I kind of think it's interesting on this one, you know, looking at common buckeye, I'm thinking, well, people don't want those plantains in their yard. But for passion vine, I know a lot of folks that find passion vine very attractive. So probably a good thing for the Gulf fritillary because that is what it needs in order to grow its caterpillars. American lady is the next one. I would like to increase the presence of this in my yard. American lady uses plants that are in the Asteraceae. So rabbit tobacco is one of those plants, plantain leaf pussy toes, wormwood, and ironweed, which is what I have pictured here. So I'm definitely going to be getting some of this particular ironweed. It's for sale at the plant sale. But what's cool about the ironweed is not only does it host American lady, but it's a great butterfly nectar plant too. So again, it's ticking multiple boxes, and I think it's an attractive plant as well. All right, cloudless sulfurs. These guys are quite common, and what they like are things in the Fabaceae, the pea family. So my assumption is that because there are so many of these, I'm sure I'm not the only one to notice that there are just plenty of cloudless sulfurs around. There are other sulfurs that you can confuse these guys with as well too, but most of them like things in the pea family. And vetch would be an example of that. Again, something that folks see as a weed. On the right there is a senna. They like plants. They like these senna plants, and you can plant this from seed in your yard. But my kind of feeling is that I have these guys everywhere. It seems to me that in nature that's nearby me, the hosts must be plentiful because these butterflies certainly are. And of course, the monarch. Monarchs only use milkweeds. So there are a variety of milkweeds. The ones that I have here and I'm recommending are the two most common ones you see. First of all, there's butterfly weed, which is a milkweed. They're all Asclepias, and it's nice because it just has such a pretty color, and it's not so huge like the common milkweed below it. Common milkweed takes up a lot of room. It reseeds very aggressively, but it does a really great service for monarch butterflies. Both of these plants are host and nectar plants, but they're definitely important if you want monarchs in your garden. All right, so some other considerations, things that you might want to think about is that if you have fruit in your, like if you have blueberry, which I thought I had blueberry in here, but if you have blueberry bushes, if you have any other, fruiting tree or shrub, if you allow some of those fallen fruits to just stay put, a lot of butterflies really like that. This is a red spotted purple, and it's enjoying fermented fruit. And in fact, some people did just put out, they'll just throw out kind of old fruit under bushes for butterflies to enjoy, and you can do that. Basking rocks. This picture again is from my parents' water feature, so they have tons of rocks. You don't need that many, but rocks are good. Places that just retain thermal mass, right? So they help warm up butterflies in times when they just need a little extra warmth. Those can be helpful and attractive to butterflies. And then puddling spots. Puddling is something that butterflies do to supplement their nutrition. So they get most of their nutrition from nectar, but they get some important amino acids and minerals from doing things like puddling. So they might be puddling just on bare soil. They might puddle on dung or urine. And to create a puddling spot, you really don't have to do much. If you just have an area of bare ground and you kind of apply some moisture, you don't want a true puddle, even though it's called puddling. You just want a moist area. But if you want to create a designated spot that makes it easy for you to view them puddling and attract them to puddling, you can sink a container down in the ground, fill it with soil, and then just put a thin layer of sand over the top to kind of help it drain. And you just spray that down every so often, and that'll be kind of a designated puddling area. It helps you kind of view them puddle. And there are people that, like if they live close to a pasture, or they have horses or cows, you can add dung, and they really will enjoy puddling from that. All right, one of the things to keep in mind with your butterfly garden is that butterflies tend to like a messy garden. So first of all, in your garden design, you have to decide, you know, what you like, what you're willing to put up with. And a lot of the kind of plants I showed you can get tall and unruly, and they're more wild looking, especially the natives. So you want to design for that, around that. But I will tell you that a really successful butterfly garden, oftentimes it is going to look kind of unruly, and it's providing layers of kind of strata for wildlife to live in and work in and thrive in. But beyond that, when it comes time for winter or spring cleanup, if you can delay your spring cleanup as far into the spring as possible, it is really helpful for butterflies, because a lot of them are in various life stages. They're overwintering in that debris. So in those on those stems, in the leaves. And if you destroy that stuff, you're very likely destroying your next year's crop of butterflies. So you can do things like cut stems and kind of gently bundle them and put them off to the side so that they don't get destroyed. But it's really just best to leave things standing as long as you can, and to avoid mowing and raking leaves where you can. Also, when spring comes, just like right now, we're seeing tons of those little flowering weeds, if you will, pop up. If you can leave those, they're a really good source of nectar. And also it's one less thing for you to worry about. And some of them are even providing hosts. Like down at the bottom here, different clover species are hosts for different butterflies. And so it's just something to keep in mind, that some of the things you might not think of, or that you might think of as unwanted in your garden, if you can be a little more flexible, then you can allow biodiversity in your garden. You can allow other species to thrive. And ultimately that's your goal, right? It's not just a pretty garden. This slide is showing these are just pictures, random pictures of butterflies in my backyard. It's just as many as I could fit on one slide, okay? So certainly there are more butterflies that visit than these, but what I wanna get at is kind of in summary, the first thing that you wanna do is survey the plants that you already have in your landscape and see what needs you're already meeting, because you may already have host plants and you may have a good selection of nectar plants, and you need to decide what is it you're not meeting the needs of. So if you see what visitors are already there, then you can kind of start by trying to amp up their numbers and bring more of them in. But then what you may notice is that you have new visitors, like maybe butterflies you've never seen before. For example, this past year, I had this butterfly visit my garden. All the butterflies I showed you on the last slide are pretty much common visitors in general to our area, to the upstate of South Carolina, at least. But this guy is a more rare butterfly to see. And it's funny because for the past couple of years in the botanical garden, we talked about how, oh, we're having giant swallowtails come into the garden because we provided citrus plants, their host plants. But I was really surprised to see this guy in my yard, because I not that I know of, I'm not providing a host for giant swallowtail. But the point is that as you go, it's going to develop more and more, and you may start taking more an interest in some of the more unusual butterflies, and you'll have to learn their habits to cater to them. But it's a really fun, gratifying process. And ultimately the point is that if you build it, the butterflies, they'll come. They really will if you provide what they need. And the fun part about it is, like I said, it truly is, it's wildlife gardening, and you can expand upon that. These are all just a few pictures from my backyard of visitors that we have. They're all in my yard because of plants, right? Because there are tons of different plants. Also, my yard is old. I've inherited a lot of plants, and I'm really thankful for that. But we've also added in lots of new plants. But the point is that more plants and more diversity of plants means more wildlife. So your garden goals are within reach. Just keep learning about it. If you have questions, my email is there. And I have a list of plants that are butterfly friendly plants that are going to be available at our plant cell that I'm glad to email to you guys, as well as a couple links. There's a really fabulous, informative chart that was put together by Clemson Extension. And so if you have questions or if there's anything else I can provide, I'm glad to do that.
Okay, that was absolutely amazing. Thank you. I'm just stunned. There's so much information. I've sworn off gardening and I can't wait to get back to gardening.
Thanks.
So in the chat, we have a couple of questions. Nancy says her autumn joy sedum falls over when blooms are heavy. Should she be staking or cutting it back? I would just stake, if it's in bloom still, I would just stake it or tie it back. Yeah. Can you cut it like early in the season so it doesn't get very leggy? You can cut it. Yeah, you can cut autumn joy, I'm pretty sure. But I thought the question was as it was, flowering. Nectar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think that, staking is an excellent option. Jonathan asks, is Japanese honeysuckle invasive? Yes. Very. And I know it's hard. There's lots of plants that I love and I have kind of memories with, if that makes sense. I have a relationship to, and it's hard to find out that some of those you really should be trying to get rid of them. But the goal is don't let that suck the joy out of it, right? Look for the things that bring you joy in gardening and keep those things in mind and tell yourself, you know what, if I remove that plant, I could maybe replace it with a really cool native plant. And that is exciting. Yep. Yep. There aren't any more questions, and I have to praise you immensely because it's 5 minutes till 1 and you did great. Well, I hope I didn't talk too fast, but I was. You didn't. No. No, that was awesome. Well, I know you'll send out emails and things. I have this recorded, so I will send the recording to you, the link. Yes. And hopefully people will join us for the next one, which I think is in a couple of weeks or so. So thank you so very much. Thank you. Bye, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Oops. Can I end it? Bye, everybody.